fairness, the
Oh,
oh, yeah.
sorry, I just cut you off.
That's
Did that
okay.
need to be off the record?
No, that's totally fine. The agenda is like very, very light, so we can like
Yes.
have social, fly through the agenda, just get it done with.
Yeah, let's get through it and then we can stop recording and continue the social call. So yes, this is the monthly call for the editor group. We're doing it a week early and off schedule, which is confusing everybody. But yeah, this is October 7th, 2021. And I'll hand it over to you, David, for the OKR stuff and EM updates.
It still says social call in the calendar. I think that's part of what's confusing.
I couldn't figure out how to change it just for this instance and not
Okay, no, we're
confuse
clear now.
everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna fly through these as quickly as humanly possible. So, upcoming time off for everybody. The next Friends and Family Day is next Friday. So, either take the Friends and Family Day, or if you have to push it to another day, that's totally fine. The EM updates for the last little while. So our say-do ratio is in and around 36%, 67 not counting where I prioritize. This is just lower than usual due to the allocations. We just have a lower amount of issues being closed than we normally would. So it kind of sits within the average of the other stages that are going through an allocation. The narrow MR rate, even though this has been deallocated as a key KPI, we're still being asked to track it somewhat. So I've put together a throughput dashboard where we can track these metrics if we need them. And at the moment, we're 7.64, which is fine. In terms of our OKR progress, we slammed the error budget. We managed to get into the range of 99.98% availability, which for the moment puts us in the green. So everybody's happy. In terms of 50% of the team completing the technical writing training, I was less concerned about this due to the reallocations and the sheer amount of other things taking place during Q3. I would still, though, highly recommend it, as it does really help reduce cycle times and MRs for people who are involved with our technical writing team. But I just want to highlight, there is a chance this might become a requirement in the coming quarters, but I'm unsure as to whether or not that's going to be the case just yet. In terms of completing 360 reviews, they've been done, they've been dusted. Everybody seems relatively happy. If anyone else is not happy, please do let me know. The mid-year performance templates are done and dusted. In terms of documenting our team accomplishments, we've done that I'm just left with my end of things, which is to compile the list, which is no big deal. So that just falls to me. And then in terms of the staff ICT, establishing mentoring relationships between staff, engineers, and team members, we're somewhere between 0 and 50 due to Fran being on an allocation. He can't really participate in that. And Dennis, his work with the source editor has contributed to some percentage, but ideally I would like that to be around performance. So hopefully for the next quarter, or maybe one after that, where we have less of an allocation, we can revisit this idea. So that's everything on the OKRs and from my end.
Awesome. I think also in particular the error budget is a huge step for us. That's a new metric. We are on the right side of things, as with the majority of groups now in the green. I know there was a discussion, or there was an update on this in particular that might carry into next quarter and involve some collaboration among the team on defining appropriate error budgets per endpoint. Now we can be more granular about where we set our targets to make sure that we stay in the green after they lower that threshold back down. For some of the part of the reason we're in the green is because they increased the threshold for latency, and so as they bring that back down, we may find our numbers a little less favorable, but we're equipped to now set, I think, per endpoint goals. So if there's like a threshold that is acceptable on the user's side of, say, 3 seconds, we don't necessarily need to go all the way down to 1 second. I'm sure there'll be more discussion about this in various issues in MRs, and we can go through our endpoints and determine what the appropriate threshold should be. Which is good, because if we just blanket set everything to 1, it's not actually reflective of both the end user experience and attainability of 1 second for any given endpoint. Other notes to add before I get in, I guess these are technically strategic product updates, but I put it in the importance notes section of the agenda. 2 MRs got merged while you were gone, Amy. 1, navigation and settings, has officially moved to foundations. The ecosystem foundations group is now the DRI for that category. Stay on mute so I can continue talking, but you can applaud and celebrate however you want. This is great news. I think they're going to be great long-term owners for it. I have a meeting on the calendar for next week to chat with their EM and design manager. I don't know if it's technically, yeah, I think design manager. So they're staffing up. They're going to be ramping up. We'll do some knowledge sharing and I offered to support the transition, but I don't think there'll be anything to directly impact any of the engineering planning on that side as far as moving the group over. So again, thank you to everybody who did great work on the navigation settings. One anecdote, I will sidetrack and say that I had a meeting yesterday where we discussed the ongoing work from the manage team working on what is now being called workspaces. It's the consolidation of groups and projects into a new concept. And in the process of discussing it, I was brought in the conversation because I had been involved in navigation and they wanted to know what kind of impacts it might have to navigation. And the good news was, hey, some of the patterns we introduced in the new top nav actually align pretty well with the changes. And so it shouldn't be that dramatic of an impact, which was great. It was a good feeling to know that there wasn't going to be this like big dependency on a major refactor if all of a sudden, instead of projects and groups in the top nav, there's just one element called workspaces or something like that. We kind of built a very flexible pattern and UX around the navigation that should help at least get them through the first few MVCs while they ramp up and look at more holistic navigation changes. So great news there. Thanks for your good work. We shouldn't have to do much more. And on a related note, not that this has been a huge amount of pressure on the engineering team in general, but GitLab Docs, which we were the technical DRI for officially, although we hadn't been prioritizing a lot of work recently, has also moved to foundations. This move for them also makes sense because as a technical DRI, they will be getting a full stack engineer to support Docs, while the Docs team can continue to work independently on the strategy and content and not have to worry about managing directly an engineering team. So they'll collaborate closely. We will no longer be the assigned technical DRI, but David has a lot of background on the Docs site, and I'm sure will be brought into conversations. This is just one step further to getting our categories a little more closely aligned to what we're actually, working on. So that was good news. A few notes under here about specific people assigned to this.
To voice what I put in the notes, Axel just went on PTO. I haven't heard if his partners had their baby yet, but otherwise he's out for 2 months. So we're just hoping that nothing breaks on the Docs site. Should probably warn the foundations folks that all the technical writers are we've got some serious shifty eyes hoping nothing happens looks.
Yeah, I know that there a lot of the the reason that the editor group has not had to support the doc site is because Axel was on there and helping out a ton. So that's a good thing to call out. But on the topic of focus, let me shift to our core editor categories and talk a little bit about the strategic monthly agenda items, which I only have 2. So I'll get through them kind of quick. First of all, thank you to everybody that could join the Think Big session yesterday. Was it yesterday? I'll post the recording and a little summary, but I felt like it was the first time that I was able to communicate, and really as a group we were all in sync with the direction of the web ID and code editing strategy. We've kind of talked about this in pieces and places and little pockets, and relied on shared understanding. We got it all out. I think everybody's fairly aligned in our priorities for the code editing experience. Next steps here are to
Here's what I found.
no, Siri. Next steps here would be to synthesize that into the direction page and socialize it. Make sure that product leadership is aligned, although I can't imagine they would argue for simplicity or argue against speed and simplicity. Then create some epics and issues to get some of that work defined. There are a lot of cross-stage collaboration opportunities for cross-stage collaboration here between the pipeline editor, code review, although that's our stage, but a different group. There potentially some opportunities in like security and further down the DevOps lifecycle. So getting some more targeted issues and sync sessions scheduled with them to collaborate on getting extensions and requirements for what they would need to create extensions, and sort of advocate for them to prioritize that work would be the next step there. Meanwhile, we should do some solution validation on this more simplified web editing experience that doesn't involve deciding between the single file editor and the web IDE. I don't expect anybody to prefer the current way, but I think we want to make sure that we get a clear set of success criteria defined, and that we're measuring in a lightweight way whether or not what we're doing is moving the needle as much as we hoped. So that's probably our next quarter's worth of work. Hopefully we can keep the ball rolling. I don't know when we'll have sufficient backend support to make meaningful changes in this direction, but we'll do as much as we can on the front end and get some solution validation done and make sure that our vision is clear. The next one on the topic of content editor, we're talking about Q4 OKRs. It had me thinking about where we're at. We had that roadmap discussion a little while back where we kind of mapped out roughly what needed to be done before we get the content editor in issues. I was just throwing out, like, if we had a Q4 push to get content editor in a better place to be the primary editing experience, in that there's UI to create all the common elements, and that's ambitious in itself, but maybe by the end of Q1 we could be looking at an MVC for getting it into issues. I think that aligns pretty well with plans, work items effort, and redesigning the issue and epic description process. But I'm curious what you all think about that, specifically, I guess, Himanshu and Enrique, who are most familiar with the roadmap there, but how ambitious do you think that is? And what else we might need to consider in the meantime?
I've got some thoughts
Reading
on it
your
too,
note.
but do we want to hear Amy's point first?
Yeah, I think that.
Let's do mine afterwards.
Okay. Do I want to jump in, Enrique or Himanshu? Because I was planning on commenting on this. Go ahead.
Oh, please go ahead, Chad.
So just this week we've been having, there's been ongoing discussions about the extension architecture, and just this week we sort of made this decision to do a greenfield spike of a different architectural approach to how to manage the extensions in possibly a more cohesive way. And just like with the content editor, I guess we're not talking about the source editor. I guess I'm really confused. However this relates to the source editor, there's some changes going around there. So like embedding that, or if there's any commonality that, because we discussed those themes, commonality between the source editor and the content editor, sharing interfaces, whatever that could possibly impact this.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair to call out, and we should make sure we're confident with the architecture and decide on any commonalities or adjustments that need to be made on either side before we move too far down that path. So that's a great point. And Enrique's typing out something.
Amy, would you like to revise your point before?
Sure, I'll go ahead. So I'm a downstream consumer of the work that the editor team will be doing here. I linked to an issue that I've been avoiding for a couple of milestones because I see this problem coming, and I'm waiting to see what you all do as an engineering team before I make any changes to the docs. The first question I would want to see answered is, where are we going? What do we want the editorial experience for our users to be called? And then I'll start asking questions like, and what other things are available? Because right now we've got more than one. Once I know what it is, then I've got to figure out, how are we going to talk about this? Because right now our documentation talks about the content editor, the web editor. That's how we see it as employees, but that's not really how users see it. Users see it as, oh, when I can edit a file and do this or this. What does that mean for me? I don't yet know how to change this up. So I want to hear what our plans are at a broad level. And then I'll need to start figuring out, okay, what does this mean I need to do?
Absolutely, and very timely. From yesterday's Think Big session, I can't put a timeline on this about when we would get here, but our goal, I think that we're all in agreement on, would be to remove any concept of the difference between editing a single file and the web IDE. They should be the same thing. You should edit a file. And then the editor should be able to be flexible enough and fast enough so that there is no reason why you wouldn't choose that. So if we said there's no single file editor, you always open the web IDE, we could make that happen, but you would be sitting there for several seconds waiting for the web IDE to load when you want to add a hyphen into a file. That's not efficient. We could say that we're going to just like hack together some kind of file tree and put it in the single file editor and do away with all the other niceties that the web IDE has, but that's not delivering on the power that the web IDE does have, which is already maybe not enough to fulfill every promise that the name web IDE delivers. So I'll upload that Think Big session. We talked about a lot of things, but I think the to distill it, the idea is that we should move forward in the near future to combine the two concepts into a single fast and flexible editing experience.
Okay. That will require some moving around. I would expect that the pages that talk about IDE or the content editor, that those would mostly go away in favor of, we talk about issues and merge requests. On those pages, we would talk about editing a merge request or editing an issue, and moving the discussion of edits and changes to the item that we are editing. And that is as far as I want to take you all down the technical writing rabbit hole. So I think right now the best takeaway is keep me involved. I know there's work coming. I just don't know what it looks like yet.
Definitely. Chad, you've got your hand up.
And some other things that were discussed in the Think Big session, and not to put plans in Eric's plan, but was not only, removing the distinction between single file and multiple file, but also possibly removing the distinction between a content editor versus a source editor versus whatever the static site editor is off to the side, and just saying, you can edit things. They may be one or multiple things, and they may be different file types, but there's an editor, and that seemed to be the general theme of the direction we wanted to go.
I would love that so much.
Excited about.
Yeah, I don't know how long it'll take us to get there. We will keep you in the loop 100% of the way. It will take us some time to execute on that vision, but I think that is where we're headed, and that should hopefully make communicating it easier, although it will require restructuring and reframing how we discuss things, but hopefully it'll be easier in the long run.
It's like that's my job or something.
We gotta keep you
framing
busy.
Framing the things we don't do. Like, we're not going to compete with Gitpod, right? We're not going to have a fully feature containerized integrated development environment.
At some point, you need to put on your big boy pants and set up an IDE.
Well, I think that you just wrote the docs for that part right now. So just Enrique, you want to get back to yours about the content editor performance?
Yes. I'm, even though the goal of getting the editor ready to be the default editing experience in the wiki, and then jumping into issues and NPCs and features, I think that it's doable. I just wanted to highlight that we need to focus on addressing the performance issues that we've found over time. In particular, reducing the bundle size of the editor and editing large documents. That may be a problem when in the context of issues and epics. Besides that, I just wanted to highlight that the work that Himanshu is doing on preserving unchanged markdown has put us ahead, really, like months ahead on achieving this goal. So I think that we are in a very good position to move forward.
And from this may be a little bit relevant to docs, like I'm hoping to free up some time and get the Golden Master specs in review, maybe this week, maybe next week. There's some time off, but that also maybe provides an easier way to focus on what is GFM and what does it offer, because it's now all in one place and it's exactly what it does, and there's examples for everything. So that might also help you from a doc perspective, Amy. And we can even do cool things like, oh, our documentations are automatically driven by these examples in here in this YAML file.
That's also very important. Like, we have such a strong test suite with the work that chat is doing. It really ensures that we are delivering a reliable work both in the front end and the back end. So thank you,
And
chat.
we did that on Pivotal Tracker. It's complex to set up and maintain, but our API docs were driven by the tests. When you ran an integration test, it captured the request and the response, and all of the docs for the endpoints were automatically generated off of that with the exact request and response. So there was no manual maintenance of that part of the docs, only the pros part of it, not the actual curl examples, which is pretty amazing.
David, do you want to read your comment?
Yeah, no, just
Or I fully agree with you.
yeah, that's fantastic. And thank you for highlighting that with the great work Himanshu has done, Enrique. I'm very happy to give that technical work priority over the next little while so we can burn that down, because I think that's going to put us in a really advantageous position later if we look at that first before we do any more of the complex feature work. So thank you very much for spotting it and highlighting it. Whatever you need in terms of support, let us know.
Yeah, you've got my support too on that. I think this milestone, for, I guess it's, what are we're planning 14.5, so we're in 14.4 now. We're getting really close to reaching that goal of the rendering of all GFM content types. So with that baseline in my head has always been, we're much less likely to negatively impact the format of a page that's loaded into the content editor and kind of misinterpret or reformat anything that exists. There's a bit of work left to add UI to, like, write superscript or manage mermaid diagrams. There's a lot of work still to do, but I would be very supportive of knocking out this technical debt before we move too fast in that direction, so that we can have a stable and performant architecture before adding all that extra UI. So yeah, we can talk about, I have it on my list today to, in a planning issue, ping you and you, Enrique. I'm looking at your square, but you didn't know that. Enrique and Himanshu on some broad themes for 14.5. So we'll see if we can fit a couple of these in there. Cool. Amy's got an open question here. I'll let you voice it over.
Since you brought up API things, this brought up a long-term question I've been sitting on. If you look in the main GitLab repo inside the doc/API directory, it's just a single directory with a giant pile of files. I have wondered for a couple of months now, from an engineer's perspective, should all of those files be lumped into a single directory? No, Chad, you cannot have everything on one page. No, bad engineer, no cookie. Should it all be just piled under API, or should we have subfolders in there to help make it a little more navigable? And if we should have subfolders, where should how to split apart? Is there some logical way that engineers see this information that I don't? Does that question make sense? Oh, bless you, Enrique.
Chad, I guess you could do you want to revise your points first?
No, I misunderstood the question. Like, it's never
okay.
going to be on a single page. But honestly, I think it doesn't matter that much. Going to my previous point, I think the ideal approach, although it's a lot of work to maintain or to set up front, it's easier to maintain, is to have them data driven. And like we have we use Grape And like, it would be possible to do these things. And we have tests for all of these endpoints. It would be possible to sort of maybe try to automate this more.
Yeah.
Not an answer to your question, but
No,
from an engineer's perspective, that's what I like to see, that they're always completely up to date with the code, because, and a technical writer as well, because they're guaranteed to write.
oh yeah.
Yeah, chat form is very important. I think that we shouldn't even be writing these docs in a Markdown document. They should be written as comments in the API in writing the implementation. It's easier to update that way. Although I know that it's gonna become some sort of technical blocker, right? For technical writers, it's gonna be more difficult to navigate for someone with another set of skills.
But you know whose problem this is going to become? Hi, David. Foundations.
I'm kind of curious, yeah, myself. I've never, to be honest, I've never looked into it, but I would be curious as to why we don't use something like Raml or Swagger to auto-generate the documentation for our API. It's something I would have to ask about. I'm sure it's been tried before, but there must be a reason we can't do it.
I can partially answer that question, but go ahead, Chad.
No, I was gonna say, like, I don't know the first one, but like Swagger, it sort of expects that things are a certain way, there is certain structure and depth, and once you start having ad hoc, it just doesn't work. At least this was the case a few years ago.
David, the answer to your question is there is no one we can assign to do the work.
Yeah, I figured it must have been down to mix matching either how the API works or non-standard, like a non-standardized approach. It would be a really fantastic win if we could standardize it, because then we could auto-generate our documentation from it. You know what? It'd be something cool to pick Lucas's brain about. I might do that in the next front-end meeting.
So a really
Could I be in
relevant. One thing that's really relevant is the ongoing discussion about the REST versus the GraphQL API, and I think where that was leaning was really the REST API should just be a wrapper around the GraphQL API. And point being, maybe that, because I think here we're mostly talking about the REST API, because the GraphQL API is a whole different set of docs. Correct, Amy?
And yes, and it is already auto-generated.
Right, the GraphQL one. So as far as the REST side, if we go down that route, if we can ever allocate the time, I'm assuming that if we turn the REST API into just sort of a thin wrapper around GraphQL under the covers, we're going to end up completely scrapping it and maybe Grape and all of that, doing significant re-architecture. So maybe at that time we can step back and think from a docs perspective, how can we auto-generate the docs from this thing, which is now just a thin wrapper anyway and not a bespoke implementation?
Yeah, that's a very good point. It might, for the moment, be a no-op while we move towards that, because we want to standardize the GraphQL API as our first and foremost API.
So at the end, like the answer is what we have doesn't make sense at all in any ways. So we probably need to just scrap all of those markdown files and do something completely different.
The whole REST API.
Welcome to all of technology. It's a miracle any of it works.
You could tell the difference last week or whenever it happened between the people who have worked in tech and the people who haven't with the Facebook outage, because everyone who's worked in tech, there was this look of, oh, it's not me this time. Oh, thank goodness.
It was a deploy bot. Can you believe that? Somebody made a deploy bot that did that and gave it the permissions.
If it can happen to Facebook, it can happen to anybody. What I will do, Amy, about the documentation question for the API is we're doing a lot of conversations at the moment about GraphQL observability and scaling up our GraphQL API. So it's a question I might bring up just as a forethought, and maybe if we can look at getting some support in front of it at the next GraphQL meeting.
That would be fantastic. There is an issue somewhere out there discussing why have we not automated our API docs. I've been trying to find it, and I'll find it after this meeting ends, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I think that discussion should be married with the one about what is the future of the REST API and does it just turn into a wrapper? Like, if that's the case, they should happen at the same time, like the rewrite of the docs and the rewrite of the API. I can try to find that one. I don't know if anybody else has the link.
I mean, there's a really snarky part of my brain that's saying, hey, you know that new developer portal? What if it got published over there?
I found it. Let me drop the link. It's called Deprecate REST API.
Thank
Right.
you. I love that consistent naming.
I'll drop it in the doc and the chat. I'm just going to delete my comment here because it's a dumb comment.
And to be clear, I have to be very careful in what I do and how hard I push here, because the discussion of implementation is not where I'm supposed to be spending my time right now. So what I can do is pose questions, try to keep people thinking about it, but this is not something I can take on right now.
Architecture is a word.
No more high-level questions. I don't want to cut it short, but we are at time. So thanks for joining, everyone. I'll stop the recording and we can enjoy the rest of our days, or the beginning of our days, as it were. And thanks for all your input. Thanks for joining. Talk to you soon.